So today we'll be looking at a design methodology which is used for designing your amplifiers using MOSFET transistors. And this methodology is basically used whenever you are trying to build an amplifier using nanometer technologies. Okay, so now before we actually talk about this GM over ID, let us look at what is a transistor basically. Okay, so we'll just begin with a very basic, and then we'll just move on further to know what exactly we are talking about it. Okay. So in this, we could see that the transistor is basically a three-terminal device, and this transistor, it can be either a BJT or it can be even a MOSFET. It's going to be a voltage-controlled current source. Okay, and this is the important property that we are going to use to design any type of amplifier that we normally have in our system. Clear? Yeah. So let me just further step down and talk about the transfer function between this V control and this I out. Now we call this graph as something like the transfer characteristic graph, just because the input to the system is basically a V control and the output is basically the current that we are looking at it. Okay. Now this scalar that we basically have that is coming out of this transistor is basically nonlinear in nature. Okay. The characteristics is basically nonlinear, and if this transistor is replaced with a BJT, then one would have for a BJT an exponential relation, right? The graph that I've plotted here basically would be an exponential graph for a corresponding control input, which would be a VBE for our BJT. Whereas when I take the other MOS transistor, okay, if it is a MOS transistor, then we would end up having some sort of quadratic characteristic graph in the place of this I out versus V control. Clear? Yeah. So now generally we model this nonlinear characteristic graph, okay, in terms of a voltage control current source. So it's just the exact replication of whatever we have done through the graph is being replicated over a kind of model. Okay, so I'm not going to call this as a small signal model. It's a kind of large signal model where the current component that I have here, which is a voltage control current source, is basically a nonlinear current source here. Okay, so and again, this voltage controlled current source is not going to be an ideal device. So we end up having some sort of finite amount of impedance, and that has been reflected with R naught here. Okay. But for analog circuit designs, we always concern about the small signal changes, right? So what exactly we mean is that we actually work with small signals. What happens when I have a small perturbation across a particular Q point? Okay, so if I apply a small perturbation across this particular Q point, what is the amount of perturbation that happens across the output? Okay, so that could be red. Now we are going to apply an important concept over here, which is called as a small signal approximation. So this small signal approximation actually takes this a small part of our characteristic graph, okay, and it tries to approximate the small wiggle. Okay, so I'm just going to have a small wiggle around this particular part of our characteristic graph, and this part that I have marked here is generally taken or considered as a kind of straight line. Okay, so approximating this entire nonlinear graph as a kind of straight line graph only for the small perturbation of signal that I apply across the input. Okay, so this basically when I adopt the small signal approximation, okay, so trying to approximate this nonlinear graph into a small linear graph, we end up having something known as the small signal model. Okay, so this small signal model, the major importance of having this, considering this line as a kind of straight line, maybe I'll write that. Okay, gives us a freedom to convert our nonlinear current voltage control current source. This was our nonlinear voltage control current source. We can be able to convert it into a linear voltage controlled current source here. Okay, so that is the beauty of this particular system. So whenever the system is linear, then it becomes easier for us to manipulate the different set of expressions. Okay, so that is the reason why we are trying to approximate this particular characteristic graph into a linear graph such that we could make our analysis much more simpler. Okay, yeah. So, and obviously even this linear voltage control current source is still not an ideal device. So we end up having some sort of small signal resistance, which we labeled as R naught. Okay, yeah. So now we know that when we try to differentiate the the output current with respect to the control input, we end up having a term that is defined as the transconductance. Okay, so we call this GM as something known as the transconductance. Okay, yeah. So now, what is this GM over ID or GM by ID, and why it is important? Okay, so to answer this, why this GM over ID or GM by ID? Okay, so why that is important, we have to know the importance of the GM itself. Okay, so I want to talk about what is the importance of this GM and what type of GM that we are expecting, whether we are expecting a small value of GM or we are expecting a large value of GM out of the circuit. Okay, so here is the list of important concepts that are related to the GM. Okay, so we know that the gain is defined as a product of GM of the system to the output impedance of the system. If I take a single transistor, then we can relate the capital GM to be equal to this small signal GM, and the output impedance is just the R naught of the circuit. Okay, so clearly, in order to have a high gain, what we supposed to have is a large value of GM. Okay, so again, we are into consideration of GM. We could see like how the value of the GM would then affect the gain of your system. Okay, the next comes tau parameter. Okay, so tau here basically represents the time constant of the circuit. Okay, now in order to talk about this time constant, I need a capacitive component CL. So I have just assumed that some sort of capacitive load is being attached to the output node of our transistor. Okay, and one could derive this particular time constant element just by assuming that this voltage controlled current source. Okay, so this is a current source that is trying to drive an RC network, right? So here you could see that this particular component, the composition of this R and CL is basically composes what is known as the RC component. Okay, in a way, through this particular reasoning, we could define that the value of this tau could be defined as the product of the output impedance times the capacity load. Okay, and this tau can also be defined in terms of bandwidth. Okay, so the inverse relation of this tau is what do we mean by the bandwidth of the circuit. Okay, so when I take the inverse, we end up having this. Okay, so now in this entire formula, we have now touched upon the GM. Okay, so what is important when we talk about a speed of the circuit is the gain bandwidth product. Okay, so this gain bandwidth product, which I have written as GBW, is a most important parameter when it comes to an amplifier design, and that amplifier design is combined into a negative feedback. Okay, so whenever we design any amplifier, we always assume that that particular amplifier is going to be attached to some sort of negative feedback. Okay, so this is an important parameter when it comes to a negative feedback circuit. Now we know that the gain bandwidth product is nothing but it's a product of the gain of the system times the bandwidth. So now when we try to multiply both these quantities, we end up having something known as a GM and then the 2 pi divided by CL. Okay, so again, in order to have a very high speed circuit, you could see that I have to increase the value of this GM. Okay, so again, having a larger value of GM in turn speeds up the circuit. The next thing is we also talk about how this GM is basically controlling the noise. Okay, so when I talk about the noise, there are different sources of noise that exist in a transistor. Okay, so in the case of a MOSFET, the thermal noise, and in the case of a BJT, we have something known as a short noise. And both these noise component, basically the noise densities, are in general are inversely proportional to the value of GM. Okay, so whatever I've written here is basically what is known as the input referred noise. And this input referred noise is again inversely proportional to the GM. So we want this noise to be kept as small as possible. And in order to have that noise to be small, we have to have a large value of GM. So increasing the value of GM in turn lowers the value of the input referred noise. So again, what we could see here is that we need a very high GM to achieve any of the parameters that we actually wanted out of the transistor that we use for the circuit design. Okay, so now we just move to the next one. In this case, we know that it's a plot of the input voltage, which is the V control, and the output current, which is I out. Okay, and the graph that I've plotted could be is a kind of nonlinear plot. So now we know that basically the GM. Okay, so GM is basically defined as the partial derivative of this output current component divided by the partial derivative of this input voltage, which is the V control. Okay, or this GM can also be visualized as a kind of a first derivative of this particular graph. Okay, so the first derivative of this particular graph is nothing but it represents the GM of the circuit. Okay, so now we know that the derivative of this graph can be visualized by as a kind of slope. Okay, so I can visualize this GM as the slope of this I out versus the V control graph. Okay, so the slope of this graph basically represents the GM of the circuit. Okay, so let me pick two different points along this particular graph. Okay, let me take this particular point, which I mark it as A. So if I take the slope of this particular graph, which is nothing but the derivative of this one, so we end up having a very small difference in the I out. Okay, so in a way, if I take a small perturbation along this particular point A, there is no much difference between the left side to the right side of the signal. Okay, so there is a very small change in the I out quantity, and due to which we end up having this dou I out, which I can write it as this current component, which is I1, and this current component, which is I2. So the difference in these two current components is written as I2 minus I1 divided by the small perturbation voltage, which I take it as a small signal, which is VCTRL. Okay, so if you calculate this particular difference, the difference between these two current components of I2 and I1 seems to be small, and due to which we end up having a very small value of GM when I choose this as my Q point. Okay, whereas let me take a different point somewhere here. Okay, and let me mark this particular point as my B point, and now over here I'm trying to apply a small perturbation. So this small perturbation would in turn intersect my I out graph at two different locations. Okay, so I am getting a current value which is I1, and the other current value that I'm getting is I2. So now when I apply this set of rule, we could see that there is a large difference between the I2 to I1. Okay, and due to which we end up having a very large value of GM. Okay, so clearly this indicates that in order to have a very high value of GM, I have to pay a large bias current. Okay, so I end up having a very large bias current, which I'm writing it as IQ here. Okay, so having a very large bias current means that we end up having a very high power consumption. So in order to get a large GM, I have to have a large bias current to the circuit, and whenever I have a large bias current to the circuit, we end up having a very high power consumption inside the circuit. Okay, so now if at all, if I'm assuming that the transistor as a system, the input to the transistor is basically the bias current IQ, which is defined as something like this. Okay, and you apply a small perturbation over here, and this perturbation in turn creates what is known as the GM. So this perturbation, we are considering that that is happening inside this particular transistor through some other input. Okay, so hope that it all makes sense. So we are paying a large current in order to get a large value of GM. Okay, and the ratio of this output to the input is what is termed as the transistor efficiency. So in short form, I'm writing it as TE. So whatever you want is basically GM, and whatever we pay in order to get the GM is this bias current IQ. Okay, now in general, we want this GM to be as high as possible without spending much of the bias current to the circuit. And if I could able to do that, we end up having a very large transistor efficiency, and the power that I'm spending also would be very small. Okay, so that is the beauty of this particular formulation. Okay, so now let us apply this conceptual idea to a BJT transistor. Okay, so as I said before, the graph that has been plotted over here is basically the collector current, and this collector current is being controlled with a potential which is the VBE. So in the place of V control, what I have is this base emitter voltage. So higher the value of this VBE, we could see that the collector current actually varies exponentially. Okay, so one could actually write this variation of this current with respect to VB as a kind of expression which you would have already studied in your courses, that IC, which is the collector current, is exponentially related to the VBE. Okay, and you have this one more term which is nothing but UT, which is called as the thermal voltage. Okay, and this thermal voltage can be approximated to a value which is equal to 26 millivolt at room temperature. Okay, yeah. So now what we are interested is the GM. Okay, so what we do next is to calculate the GM of this particular circuit. So what we do is that I have to take a derivative of this output current with respect to the input voltage, which is VB. And that when we do, we end up having a kind of expression which looks something like IC divided by UT. Now, one thing that you have to observe here is that this GM is actually directly proportional to our collector current. So what does it mean? So this means that the shape of the graph of GM is identical to the shape of my collector current graph, okay, that you could see from both these graphs. The only thing is that the difference between these two, obviously, is the scale, the scaling component. So this IC is basically scaled by a factor of 1 over thermal voltage, okay. So that's the difference between these two graphs. Otherwise, the shape remains the same. The values differ by the scale factor, which is the thermal voltage. Clear? Yeah. So now, let us talk about the ratio. Now, it's obvious that when I take the ratio of this, which is GM over the output current component, which is the IC here, okay? So let us talk about this GM over IC for a BJT and GM over ID for a MOSFET, clear? So let us talk about this. So what you would end up having for this is basically 1 upon UT. And this 1 upon UT is nothing but it's equal to 1 upon 26 millivolt. And that is nothing but it would be equal to, I think, I have written down here, yeah. So that could be approximately closer to the value of 38.5 millisiemens per ampere, okay? So now when we look carefully here, what you could see is that irrespective of whatever the VB that I have here, I end up having this transistor efficiency as a kind of constant, okay? So it doesn't matter what value of VB that I'm applying, we end up having the same efficiency throughout this entire values of VB that I've applied, okay? So it could be a VB value which is equal to 0.1, or it can be a VB value which is equal to 1 volt, okay? It doesn't matter. We end up having the same transistor efficiency out of the circuit, okay? So no one actually really talked about what is known as GM over IC for a BJT, okay? And hence there is no GM over IC design methodology that existed for analog designers to use as a kind of design variable. Okay, so that was the reason why we never see this particular term that has been used while designing any BJT amplifiers. Okay, yeah. So before we move from this BJT story to the next one, which is the MOSFET, I just want to brief about some mathematical terms, and I just want to talk about the ratio between the GM of this circuit to the output current component. Okay, so what does this ratio actually conveys as mathematically? Okay, so let us try to understand this mathematical relation and then try to derive some sort of insight into this ratio, and then we will just move ourselves from this BJT story to what is known as the MOSFET. Clear? We generally know that the log to the base value, let me have this base value to be b of y, that is equal to x. Okay, so the inverse function of this particular term can be written as something like y, that is equal to the base value, which is b, to the power of x that I have over here. Okay, so this is the inverse function of what is written towards the left side. Clear? So what does it mean is basically when you have a log to the base value of 10 of y that is equal to x, then I can have the inverse function to be y that is equal to 10 to the power x. Okay, and the next one is the ln. Okay, so if I say that I have a ln of y, okay, so this means that the ln is nothing but it is log to the base value of e of y that is equal to x. So how I can write it in terms of y? The y could be written as y e to the power of x. Okay, so having got this mathematical terms, let us also try to talk about the ln value of e to the power x. Okay, so when I take the ln value of e to the power of x, we end up having an x itself. Okay, if I take ln, then exponential term is nothing but the inverse function of the ln. So we end up having a value which is x, and this same applies even for this quantity where I have an exponential term raised to the power of ln of x. Okay, so we end up having this as our output. Clear? Yeah. So what we do next is look at the derivative term. Okay, so let us try to make a derivative of this ln of x, okay, with respect to x itself. So when I try to do this, we know that the actual formula would end up something like 1 upon x here, right? Now, in case if I replace this x with a function which is defined as y of x, so that when I do so, we end up having ln of y, okay, which is going to be again a function of x. So that would end up having something like 1 upon x into the derivative of this. Okay, so this is what we end up having here. And now what I'm going to do next is to try to replace the value of y with the collector current, okay, and the value for x with VBE. Okay, so what we would have is something like this, right? So it would be like, and over here the x value is basically VBE. Sorry, I think I did something wrong here. Sorry, there is a small mistake that I did here. Okay, so here it is 1 upon y times the derivative of y with respect to x. Clear? Yeah. So now trying to apply all of these formulas just by replacing the y with collector current and the x variable with VB, we would end up having something like IC, 1 over IC here. And there is a derivative of IC with respect to the VB. Now we already know that this derivative term, that is the derivative of this collector current with respect to VB, is nothing but the GM of the system, right? So I could replace this term that I have here is nothing but it represents the GM of my circuit. Okay, so we finally end up having a term which is GM divided by IC, and this GM divided by IC is nothing but it represents the derivative, the first derivative of a logarithmic collector current. Okay, so in general, whenever we are talking about GM over IC, this GM over IC is nothing but it's the first derivative of a logarithmic current component. So this is what we could see, that the ratio between this transconductance divided by the bias current is nothing but it reflects the first derivative or the slope value of this natural log of our collector current. Okay, so the GM over IC represents logarithmic collector current. Okay, whereas this GM, how it is different from this GM over IC is that this GM alone represents just the collector current. Okay, that's the difference between the GM and the GM over IC. Okay, so if you could able to know these differences, then it becomes easier for us to analyze our GM over ID term. Okay, that is the reason why I just spent some time to talk about this importance of this. Okay. Yeah, so this is a statement that we finally found, that just because the GM over IC is constant throughout the entire value of VBE, there doesn't exist any sort of GM over IC design methodology for a BJT. Okay, due to this reason, what we do next is that we will shift our focus onto the MOSFET GM over ID parameter and see whether we have a variable behavior over the control input of VGS. Clear? For the MOS transistor. Yeah. So we know that the MOS behavior is completely different from a BJT counterpart. So first, let us begin with our discussion of a long channel MOS transistor saturation region current equation. Okay. So now the reason why we are concerned about the saturation current equation is that it, generally the saturation region is the most preferred mode of operation for analog circuit design when it comes to using a MOS transistor for an analog design. Okay, that is the reason why we just have this particular slide. Okay, for a transfer to be in the saturation zone, there are a few conditions that we have to satisfy. The very first thing is that the value of VGS supposed to be greater than the value of VT. So this is the first condition. And the second condition is that the value of VDS for an NMOS, okay, so this is all with respect to the NMOS transistor is what I'm trying to write down here, okay. The value of this VDS can be either greater than or equal to VGS minus VT. Now, in general, this VGS minus VT term can also be rewritten as VOV or the overdrive voltage. Okay, so we generally want this condition to be satisfied. Clear? And the current equation in the saturation region can be written as ID that is equal to half Kn dash W by L VGS minus VT the whole square or VOV square. Okay, so now this is the model that we always use whenever we study those analog circuit designs in our courses, right? So now let us see the actual behavior of the circuit. I've just written down the square law relation that is towards the left side, and also I've equally represented the corresponding current components towards the right side. Okay, and what is important is that we know that the current ID is proportional to the VOE square. Okay, so based on this, when I try to plot the graph, okay, you would see that there is a kind of square law that has been used with a black dotted line. Okay, whereas I have used two different channel lengths and widths for plotting the same current graph over here. Okay, but when we look carefully here, what happens here is that you could see that the current graph of my large channel, okay, this is 20U by 2U, is nothing but it's a quite large transistor, and that could actually somewhat getting coincident with our square law model. Okay, but whereas when we take this shorter form, okay, when I'm going for a channel length that is equal to 200 nanometer, you could see that obviously there is a huge amount of deviation from the graph that has been predicted by the square law relation. Okay, and also we know that the transconductance is nothing but it is the derivative of the output current with respect to the control input voltage, which is in this case a VGS. So that when we do and when we try to plot, you could see that there is a tremendous difference between the square law model and either it is a large channel or even a shorter channel. You could see that there is a huge difference between these two laws. Okay, I hope that it makes sense. The GM value that we have predicted through the square law model is actually getting far away from what is actually happening through the circuit. Okay, when we try to plot them in the real device. Okay, so now why there exists a significant deviation? That would be the question that would be creeping right now, right? So to answer this question, we have to look at some of the second order effects which causes this significant deviation, okay, from what has been predicted through the square law. The very first thing that I just want to emphasize here is that it's a kind of graph that has been plotted on a logarithmic scale, okay, of the output current with respect to the value of VGS. Now, clearly you could see that even if I consider the value of VT, the threshold voltage, is considered to be roughly around 0.5 volt, you could see that still there exists a kind of current component when the value of VG is less than the value of VT. Okay, so even throughout this entire segment, we could see that there is a current. Okay, but what we predicted through the square law is that whenever the value of VGS falls below the value of VT, we said that the current ID is generally considered to be equal to 0. But whereas here, it reflects the fact that the term or the assumption that we had earlier is no more valid. Okay, and let us look for the second characteristic graph. So this is again, we call this as a kind of drain-induced barrier lowering, which talks about the variation of the threshold voltage with respect to the value of VDS. Okay, so generally, what we assume whenever we study our basic theory about the MOSFET is that the threshold voltage is always assumed to be a constant. Okay, but the assumption actually fails when we actually try to plot the graph between the threshold voltage and the VDS. Okay, so maybe I'll just share you a link regarding this drain-induced barrier lowering. The next one is the most important parameter. So again, we talk about short channel effects, and under the short channel effects, I have to talk about what is known as the velocity saturation effect. Okay, now again, this velocity saturation effect is basically happens because of the VDS. Okay, and even this drain induced barrier lowering effect is basically happening because of the value of the VDS. Okay, so I'm just trying to convey the causes because of which these things are happening. Okay, so let us talk about this velocity saturation effect. Okay, basically the channel gets created. So let me consider this as my oxide region. Okay, and this is my metal region, and this is going to be considered as a kind of p-type material. So when I have the value of VGS that is greater than the value of VT, we know that it creates an inversion layer underneath this particular interface between the oxide and the substrate. Okay, so let me represent that inversion layer with some sort of negative charges getting accumulated over here. Okay, so this represents basically the channel inversion. Okay, or a kind of inversion that we call it as stronger inversion. Okay, so I'm going to convey this particular terminology, which we call this as a strong inversion, and we also talk about different other type of inversion that happens. Okay, yeah. So basically, in order to have a current conduction between the source and the drain, okay, we have to have a potential difference between the source and the drain. Okay, and when we have this, then we end up having some sort of current flow from the source terminal towards the drain terminal. Okay, so we end up having this drain current flowing from a higher potential towards the lower potential through this stronger inversion region. And this strong inversion region happens whenever we have the value of VGS that is greater than the value of VT. Okay, whenever we deal with shorter channels, one of the most important secondary effect that plays a major role is this velocity saturation effect. Okay, so let me try to spend some time in order to talk about this. What do we mean by velocity saturation effect? Okay, now a velocity saturation effect can be related to the drift velocity and the electric field. So let me write this as a V, which talks about the drift velocity towards the y-axis. Okay, based on the basic physics, we know that as we increase the electric field, what happens is that the velocity of your carriers become higher. Okay, so normally this is what has been predicted. That is, the drift velocity is generally proportional to the electric field. So higher the electric field that I have, the velocity of the carriers will also rise up. Okay. Now, because of this relation, we have derived the current equation model, which is ID. Okay, and this entire formulation is being done based on the basic principle that the electric field and the velocity of the carriers actually move in the same direction. Okay, the electric field is basically defined. Okay, I'm trying to convey this electric field is a field that exists between the source and the drain. Okay, so whenever we have a potential difference between the source, so between the drain and the source terminal, then it creates some sort of electric field between these two nodes. Okay, and because of which the carriers are being moving from one terminal to the other terminal with a particular velocity, and we call that particular velocity as a drift velocity. Okay, and this entire current flow is basically being derived based on the drift velocity mechanism. Okay, but when I take a shorter channel, the electric field, which I call it as a lateral electric field, okay, just because this electric field is created by the VDS, okay, across the channel. So I could write it as VDS by the channel length, which is L. Okay. Now, once the channel length becomes small, what is happening is that even for a small value of VDS, a small potential difference between the drain and the source creates a very large electric field. Okay, and there is again the physics also plays a major role based on the quantum mechanics. The mass of the electron that creates this current, okay, also becomes large. Okay, and because of which the velocity of the carrier gets saturated, and we call this particular mechanism as a velocity saturation effect. Okay, there is a particular electric field which we call it as a critical electric field, beyond which when you try to have a larger electric field, the velocity of the carrier becomes saturated. Okay, and we call this effect as the velocity saturation effect. Okay, and this normally happens whenever the channel length that you're using is small, and due to which the current basically becomes proportional to VGS minus VT. Okay, whereas in the previous case, whenever we do not have, or whenever the electric field is less than the critical electric field, we end up having that the current ID is basically proportional to VGS minus VT the whole square. Okay, whereas here there is no square term that sits here. Okay, so that's the difference. So due to which the ID right now, whenever your transfer suffers from velocity saturation effect, the ID becomes linearly dependent on our VGS. Okay, rather than quadratic dependency, we end up having some sort of linear dependency. Okay, Also, this current will also be independent of the channel length. Okay, so there is a lengthy derivation that has been done. Okay, I'll share the link of this where you will find that the proportionality of the length is also being removed. Okay, so when I consider this current equation, we know that the current drain current depends on the value of L. Whereas when your transistor suffers from velocity saturation effect, the dependency of this 1 over L is not there. Okay, so that is what we end up having whenever the transistor suffers from velocity saturation effect. Okay, the next one is what is known as the mobility degradation. Okay, and this happens because of the VGS. Now you might wonder, like, how does this VGS actually impacts the mobility of your carriers? Okay, so what is happening is that when we go for lower and lower technology, the thickness of the oxide that I have here will also shrink down. Okay, the thickness of this oxide, okay, maybe I will just put here, the TOX will also get shrink down. Okay, and we know that the electric field that is created because of this dielectric medium can be returned as something known as the vertical electric field. Okay, because I am trying to apply a gate potential with respect to the source, right? So because of this, what is happening is that this vertical electric field can be returned as VGS by the thickness of the oxide. Okay, so the moment I reduce the thickness of the oxide, the electric field across this oxide layer also increases, okay, tremendously. And because of this, all of the carriers that supposed to move in the horizontal direction, they were being attracted towards this vertical direction because I am applying a high electric field. Okay, so because of this, you are forcing these electrons to rub at the interface. So you just assume that you are trying to run across a pathway. Okay, so if you are in the middle, you can actually run freely, right? But whereas if you are being forced to run across the side wall, what happens is that just because of this interface, you end up hitting this surface, okay, across the oxide, and due to which the mobility of the carrier gets degraded. Okay, so that is what is called as the mobility degradation. Yeah, the next important thing is that the GM, okay, actually gets saturated for higher values of VOV. Okay, now this is something that we normally never expected, right? Because whenever we wrote this GM based on the square law, we know that this GM is proportional to the VOV. So as I rise the value of VGS beyond the value of VT, okay, what happens is that I have to have a kind of GM that keeps increasing as I move along the x-axis. But what has happened here is that you could see that the GM of the transistor are getting saturated. So one thing that we could conclude is that in the strong inversion, the square law basically gets failed. Okay, so that is the final conclusion that we could see when we look at a real device. Okay, so whatever the square law, whatever the current equation that we are studying in our courses actually is not true. Okay, they are basically not applicable when you go for shorter channel devices. They are not applicable for nanometer technologies. Okay, and due to which we end up having these many issues. And now let us see, like, how about the GM over ID term? Okay, based on the square law, I can actually derive this term, which is GM over ID. Okay, let us look. Even though we know that the square law fails in the strong inversion region, okay, we'll still try to derive and see whether the prediction happens or not. Okay, so again, when I have taken a current, okay, where the current is a saturation current equation, and based on this current, I am trying to create a derivative, so that derivative with respect to the control input, which is the VGS, so that I end up having the GM of the circuit. Okay, and when we take the ratio between this GM and the ID, we end up having 2 by VOV. Now using this as my expression, when I try to plot, okay, here in this case the black dotted line represents the expression quantity. Okay, now we know that the moment the value of VGS is equal to VT, this GM over ID term supposed to shoot up to infinity. Okay, that is what this expression conveys us. Okay, but in reality, if you see, I have plotted the blue line and the magenta line. These are for different channel lengths. Okay, the blue line is for a channel length which is 2 micrometer, whereas the magenta line that I've drawn is for the channel which is of 200 nanometer. Okay, so clearly the prediction of having this GM over IC to be infinity is not valid when I'm trying to have a value of VGS that is less than the value of VT. Okay, they are actually different. Okay. Also, one more thing that we could see is that this GM over ID becomes a constant. The ratio of GM over ID is constant whenever we deal with a value of VGS that is less than the value of VT. We end up having, now what does it conveys? I hope that we have learned about this GM over IC was constant throughout the entire region. Okay, I guess we have seen that particular plot when we discussed about
for
the
BJT.
BJT. Yeah. Okay. So whenever it is constant, how I can predict the value of this IC to be? So this IC is supposed to have an exponential relation to our VB is what it told us. Okay. So whenever the GM over IC is constant, it says that the current component in general is exponentially relies on the control input. Okay, so that is what it conveyed in our BJT. Yeah, even here we could see that this GM over ID is also constant. So this means that the current ID also somehow exponentially is related to the value of VGS. The control input here is basically a VGS. Okay, so that is what it conveys me. So in short, the ID is no more equal to 0, and it is also telling us that the ID is proportional to the e to the power of VGS term. Okay, so before we look at this current expression, let me summarize what we have learned, and then later we will just talk about how will I derive this current component in the coming slide. Okay, as I said, just because we have some sort of GM over IC for the value of VGS that is less than the value of VT, we could see that there is a constant GM over ID term over here, right? So due to this, I could say that there is a kind of current that is flowing, and that current is flowing through what is known as the weak inversion region. Okay, so I hope that you are clear. I have a non-zero current component for the value of VGS that is less than VT, and that's supposed to be some sort of inversion region, right? And we call that inversion region to be a weak inversion region along the channel. Okay, and whenever the value of this GM over ID, if it is large, okay, then we say that the current is exponentially related, or in other words, we could see that I'm in the weak inversion region. Whenever the GM over ID is constant or larger, we say that we are in the weak inversion region. Whereas whenever the GM over ID term is small, we say that we are in the stronger inversion region. Okay, so one could see that there is a kind of variation of GM over ID over the control input VGS. Okay, so due to which I can tweak this GM over ID term to define the transistor efficiency. Okay, because at different values of VGS, I have different values of transconductance efficiency. Okay, it is not the case what we have learned in a BJT. Okay, in this case, we are having some differences, and due to which I can decide like what is the efficiency I needed based on the value of VGS here. Okay, and that is the core of this GM over ID. Okay, we are having some sort of variation for the control input. Now, apart from these two different regions, that is the weak inversion and the strong inversion, we also have a third region, which is called as the moderate inversion. Okay, so moderate inversion or MI. I'll talk about this. Okay, but before that, I just summarize over here. The current ID is basically can be written as an exponential relation to VGS. Okay, whereas here the current component, I can still use this square law. Okay, so if it is a square law, we know that the channel length has to be large, and due to which I could write somehow related to VGS minus or proportional to VGS minus VT, the whole square. Okay, so that is what this is conveying. Okay, but we know that there are these two different current expressions. Okay, so one is telling it's supposed to be exponentially related to VGS. The other one is telling you have to be related to quadratically to the value of VGS. But there is obviously these two are two different expressions. Okay, or two different scales at which they are trying to talk. But we know that whenever we sweep this particular VGS, the GM over ID or even the current, okay, is a kind of continuous current that I'm getting. Okay, so we cannot have two different distinct functions. Okay, so when I try to plot the value of ID with respect to VGS, you could see that there is a continuous current flow. Okay, there is nothing like an exponential current first and then suddenly it jumps to a kind of quadratic current expression. Okay, you could see that there is a continuous function between these two quantities. So now there is a kind of expression that is needed to bridge these two current components, and this bridge is created by this moderate inversion region phenomena. Okay, we know that generally in BJT, the current flow is basically defined by the diffusion current. Okay, the current is basically flows because of the diffusion mechanism. Okay, whereas in the case of the stronger inversion, where we apply the square law, we go for what is known as the drift mechanism to derive the current equation. Okay, so these are two different mechanisms through which the currents are flowing. Okay, and we are trying to bridge them. And what happens is that we know that there exists a moderate inversion region. Okay, where I'm not completely inside this drift mechanism, nor I'm not in the diffusion mechanism. Okay, so but I'm somewhere in between them, and we call that intermediate relation through which the current is flowing, still flowing, as a kind of moderate inversion zone. Okay, hope that it makes sense. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that there exist three different inversion layer when I try to tweak the value of VGS between 0 to all the way to the power supply of our circuit. Okay, and in turn, this GM over ID is also a kind of continuous function. Okay, so it is not completely constant, nor it is not completely dependent on the value of VGS minus VT the whole square. Okay, so it seems to be a kind of continuous behavior. Okay, and through this GM over ID, I can control certain other parameters. Like I can actually control the transconductance efficiency, and this in turn, we know that it defines the speed, the noise, and the entire behavior. Okay, even the behavior of the circuit is also being defined through this GM over ID term. Okay, so one has to be careful in selecting this particular value to meet your given specification. Okay, so you could see from this GM over ID that the range of value that we have got along this y-axis ranges from a value of 1 all the way to a value of maximum of 30, or sometimes if it is a shorter channel, you end up having a value which is closer to the value of 29. Okay, or you may end up having a maximum value of 31 depending on different channel lengths that I have. Okay, so we could see that there is a particular range of values. Okay, now you might ask me, like, what is the range of GM over ID that I can say that it is equal to weaker inversion, and the range of value of GM over ID that I can say that I'm in the stronger inversion, and the range of GM over ID value for which I can say that the transistor is in moderate inversion. But to be frank, there is no hard rule. Okay, there is no hard boundaries that defines all those three different regions inside this. Okay, one thing that I can say is that whenever the GM over ID is high, okay, when the value of this GM over ID is high, then I can say that I'm in the weaker inversion. Okay, whenever the value of this GM over ID is small, then I can say I'm in the stronger inversion. Okay, and whenever I'm in between them, I could say that I'm in the moderate inversion. Okay, but still people try to define some sort of boundary to use as a kind of reference value for them. Okay, so let me roughly define this boundary, but this is not a hard rule. Okay, so whenever the range that of GM over ID falls between this 10 to 20. Okay, so anything that falls between 10 and 20, we say that the transistor is in the moderate inversion region. Okay, whereas anything that goes below the value of 10, okay, we call them as a stronger inversion, and anything that pass beyond the value of 20, we say that our transistor is in the weaker inversion. So now you might wonder, like, is my square law that I'm trying to read in today's classes, can I not use it for any of the purposes? That is going to be an end of the usage of the square law. But the answer to this question is not true exactly. Okay, we can't say that the usage of the square law has ended. Okay, so we can still use the square law whenever we deal with a channel length that is larger. Okay, whenever I have a channel length that is large, I can use the square law. also have to ensure that I'm being biased in the stronger inversion. So in order to bias this transfer in the stronger inversion, then I have to have the GM over ID to be fixed to a small value. Okay, so if I fix to a small value, then this says that I'm in the stronger inversion. So if I have these two phenomena, then I can still make use of the square law. But that is not the end. Okay, one of the important reason why still we go through the square law model during our classes is that it actually makes us or helps us to understand the trends. Okay, now what do I really mean by the trends? The trends here actually means, say for example, you want to achieve a particular spec. Okay, in order to achieve a particular spec, we have to have some sort of simple model. Okay, so I need this current equation, okay, which I'm writing it as the square law model. Okay, so we know that whenever I'm trying to use the square law model, I know that the current that flows between the source and the drain is basically defined by few parameters. Namely, I need to know what is the kn dash value, and the length and the width is in our control, and the value of VGS minus VT. Okay, so these are very few set of parameters that I needed to calculate the current expression. Okay, so having the square law model actually helps us to bring out certain things. Like using this model, we know how to get the value of GM, or we know how to evaluate the value of R naught, or there are a lot of small signal parameters that were been basically derived based on the simple square law model. So even though we end up having the GM that has been derived out of this square law model, still I can make use of the square law model for our understanding purpose. Okay, so say for example, you are being asked to increase the gain of a system, okay, gain of an amplifier, and and without this simple model, I will not be knowing like what I supposed to increase. Should I need to go for increasing the value of GM or increasing the value of this R naught? That is not sure, right? Because it is through this model I know that the gain can be written as the product of GM times that of R out. Okay. Now, in order to increase the gain, or in order to increase the gain, or in order to increase the GM, or in order to increase the R naught, I also have to know which particular parameter I need to vary. Okay. We know that in the case of a GM, it is actually proportional to the width, and again, it is also proportional to the VOV, or it can be also written in terms of ID as well. Okay. So this simple model shows different ways by which I can achieve this GM. Okay, but I cannot use this to actually calculate the expression. The value of this GM I cannot uh, calculate from the square law model. But what I know from this square law model is that which particular parameter I supposed to vary to achieve that high GM. Okay, so give some sort of direction to us. Okay, so okay, I have to increase the width. Okay, I should not lower the length or something like that. It conveys us. Okay, so that is what we really mean by the trends. So we want the model to be simple so that it gives a kind of direction for us, and using that direction I know what I supposed to change in order to achieve a particular spec. Okay, so but for sure I cannot use that square law model to actually calculate the sizing. Okay, so that is not valid, but it gives me the direction. So due to which, still whatever you're studying in your courses is good enough for us to understand its trend. Okay, so now we will just revert back to this quantity that is in the weak inversion region. Okay, so we know that the GM over ID term gets saturated whenever I deal inside the weaker inversion region. Okay, and because of this, what happens is that I end up having a kind of exponential graph. Okay, now what I said is that I have an exponential graph over here, but this exponential graph or the current that I have here is normally not visible when I try to plot along the normal axis. Okay, so now instead of plotting this ID in a normal axis, I'm trying to convert this ID in a logarithmic axis. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to plot a y-axis in terms of logarithmic scale. Okay, so due to which you could see that there exists a kind of slope. Okay, so there is a line, and this line actually exhibit a slope. Now, what is this slope conveys us? So what I said at the beginning is that the GM over ID is actually represents the slope of the logarithmic scale of the current ID, right? Yeah, so in this case, you could see that there is a slope that exists when I'm working in the weaker inversion, and because of which, when I try to read the slope value is constant throughout this entire region. Okay, throughout this entire region, the slope is constant, and due to which you could see that the constant value is getting reflected onto my GM over ID. Okay, so since because the slope is constant, we end up having a constant value of GM over ID when I'm working in the weaker inversion. Okay, and that is how it exponentially depends. Okay, now what we do next is to try to derive the current equation. Now, why does this current flows? What is the mechanism by which the current actually flows between the source and the drain is what we want to analyze right now. Now, when I look carefully here, it's nothing but it's an NMOS channel. And whenever I have a value of VGS that is less than VT, what happens is that it creates some sort of depletion region, okay? But there is no charge carrier or the free carriers that exist between the source and the drain. Then you might wonder like how exactly then the current can flow between them, right? So I have to talk about the substrate medium that I have here, okay? The type of substrate that I have is basically a P-type substrate for an NMOS transistor. Okay. Now clearly there exists an N-type material for the source and then a P-type material along the substrate and then again an N-type material for the drain. So clearly this is nothing but it's a kind of BJT, right? So it's nothing but it's an NPN transistor that I could see over here. Okay. So across this I could see there exists an NPN transistor, something like this, between the source and the drain. Okay, so the base of this BJT is actually getting connected to the gate terminal of our MOSFET. Okay, but this connection happens through some sort of dielectric medium. Okay, so you could see that there is a dielectric medium and you have a potential across this particular gate where this potential gate voltage is lesser than the value of VT. Okay, so obviously when you have this kind of setup, it actually end up creating some sort of an oxide capacitance, and also there is also one more layer that happens between the oxide and the substrate. We could see that there are depletion layer, and we know that these depletion layer are being created using immobile carriers. Okay, so these are ions, they are not supposed to move, so they can also be considered as a kind of oxide kind of material. Okay, so due to which we end up having two type of, maybe this is not COX, it is the C diffusion. Okay, so because of this layer, the diffusion immobile ions, okay, we have one more capacitance that is connected from this interface towards the body of our transistor. Okay, so that is what is being plotted. So now if we see that the gate is connected to the base of my BJT through some sort of capacitive divider network. Okay, so we have two type of capacitance between the gate and the body of our MOS structure. Okay, there are two capacitances that are there, and because of which we end up having this as a kind of setup. Okay, now if I know what is the value of VBE, the effective value of VBE, then it becomes easier to derive the current equation that flows between the source and the drain when I'm working in the weaker inversion. Okay, so due to which I use this capacitor divider formula to calculate the effective value of VBE here. Okay, so that is nothing but the VBE can be written as VGS into the capacitive divider network, which is written as COX divided by the summation of these two capacitances. Okay, so it's just a simple capacitive divider network formulae that I've used. Okay, and that I can step down this division as a kind of a ratio factor. Okay, so we call this N as a kind of slope factor. Okay, and in general the factor N is quite higher than the value of 1. So this means that the effective voltage VBE that I have across this BJT is normally smaller than the voltage that I directly apply to the value of VGS. Okay, so in a way, I could write this drain current, however I've written down the collector current, the same way I can write down my drain current as well. Okay, and that could be approximately closer to the saturation current. Okay, in this case, it is the off current that has been written, and it is exponentially related to the VBE. But we know that this VBE is stepped down by a factor of N. Okay, so that when I plug in here, I end up having a VGS divided by the slope factor times that of the thermal voltage UT. Okay, and normally when we look for a bulk MOSFET, okay, for any particular technology, the range of value, this N, varies from 1.2 to 1.1. But when you go for silicon on insulated technologies or FinFET technologies, the value of N is actually closer to the value of 1.1. Okay, now using this current equation, I just want to calculate GM over ID term. Okay, So in order to do that, I first have to perform a derivative on this current expression. And when I do so, we end up having a GM that is directly proportional to the value of ID, okay? But they are being scaled down by a factor which is n times that of UT. So what does it mean? When I compare this GM that I'm getting with the BJT, we have something like IC divided by the thermal voltage, okay? Whereas here, the GM value is further stepped down by this factor n. So this means that the efficiency that I would get out of this MOSFET is less compared to the transistor efficiency that I would get in a BJT, okay? So the transistor efficiency that we normally get in a BJT was quite higher, and the value is 1 upon UT, and that is equal to somewhere 38.5. And okay, so this is what we have seen in the previous slide, okay? Whereas in this case, this value is generally divided by the slope factor, and because of which the transistor efficiency that we normally get in the weaker inversion would range from 35 to 25, okay? So if you are using something like a FinFET, then you can have a maximum transistor efficiency, whereas when you go for normal MOSFET technologies, then you may even get a maximum value of GM over ID that is closer to 25 as well, okay? Next, we will see the use cases of this weaker inversion, okay? In this case, first we'll look at the gain of this particular circuit, okay? So we know that the gain can be written as GM times R out, and again, the R out can be written as VA, which is nothing but the early voltage divided by the bias current of the circuit, okay? So this bias current is right now the current that is defined in the weaker inversion. So whatever I'm trying to talk right now is with respect to the weaker inversion, okay? And the graph on the right side plots for all, but I'm just concerned about the maximum gain that I would attain from this particular transistor, okay? So clearly, we could see that the gain clearly depends on this particular ratio, correct? So the gain is proportional to GM over ID. Now we know that we would get a maximum GM over ID value only in which region? It is in the weaker inversion, okay? And that is what we have seen till now, okay? In the weaker inversion, I know that I will get a larger value of GM over ID, okay? So generally, you might tend to use this GM over ID to be large in order to have a very high gain, okay? So in the case of a stronger inversion, this ID can be replaced with half K dash W by L, and when you try to substitute them, we would end up having something like twice the value of VA divided by VOV if you're trying to use the stronger inversion region and trying to adopt the square law model. Whereas when you try to adopt the sub-threshold model, then this ID can be replaced with ID that is approximately equal to e to the power of VGS divided by UT, okay? Yeah, so this is the current that I've used here. So that when I try to adopt, we end up having this as our gain, okay? So clearly, by making use of the square law model, I can predict the value of gain in the stronger inversion, and I can predict the value of gain in the weaker inversion. And now when we really compare these two values, assuming that the value of VA is constant, okay? So we will address this as well, okay? So in this case, let us assume that the value of this VA is assumed to be constant. We know that the value of UT in general is quite small, okay? And the value of VOV in general taken around like 1.1, even 1.2 is what generally people would take, okay? So this means I am having a VOV value which is almost closer to 200 millivolt, okay? And this is the least value that I can use, okay? If you are using in that way, you would still get to know that the gain that you would achieve in the stronger inversion is small compared to the gain that you can achieve in the weaker inversion, okay? So the same you could see over here as well, okay? So here I have plotted both these graphs for two different channel lengths, okay? The one on the top is for the shorter channel length, okay? So clearly you could see that the model that is drawn with the blue colored line, okay, not the dotted line. The dotted lines are by making use of this models, okay? I've used these two models to draw these dotted lines gain predictions, okay? But what you could see here is that you could see that the GM times R naught is quite higher when I'm working in the weaker inversion for both the channels, okay? So if at all, if I want to have a higher gain, then should I need to operate my transistor in the weaker inversion? So that would be the question that you might normally have, okay? But there is one thing that we also have to consider, and that is nothing but the transit frequency. Okay, so generally the transit frequency is defined. I'm just writing down the formula, but you can just find this relation in everywhere in your textbooks or something. Okay, so I'm just directly writing this particular formula. Okay, so this is a transit frequency formula, and clearly you could see that there's a dependency on the gate capacitance. Okay, this CGG is nothing but when I take a MOS transistor, we know that there is a metal oxide semiconductor region. Okay, and that imposes a capacitance which we call it as a CGG. Okay, so it is inversely proportional to the value of CGG. Now let us see like how does it impacts our FT. Okay, as you could able to see, this is my graph that has been plotted on the logarithmic scale. Okay, the current graph of the MOSFET, and clearly you could see that the graph shows that the current is actually getting degraded exponentially when we move inside the weaker inversion region. Okay, this means that the GM of this particular MOSFET will also tries to get smaller. Okay, we have already studied the importance of the GM, right? We want this GM to be always large. Now, clearly, we could see that whenever I'm trying to operate in the weaker inversion, the current is stepping down, and due to which the GM, which shares the same relation as that of my ID by just by a scale factor, we know even the GM will also be reducing. Okay, in order to maintain the constant value of GM over ID. In order to have this to be constant, GM over ID, when the current is getting degraded, even the GM also has to get degraded at the same rate in order to ensure that the ratio remains constant. Okay, but in turn, the speed also gets decreased. Now, why the speed of the circuit gets degraded is just because of this relation that I've said. Okay, so when you try to reduce the value of GM to maintain the constant GM over ID in the weaker inversion, we end up having the FT getting reduced. The speed of the circuit gets reduced, and the same is being reflected over here. Okay, so whenever you are operating in the weaker inversion, we know that the GM over ID is high. Okay, and these are the corresponding values of FT that I've plotted over here. Okay, so the value of FT is small, and as you move along this particular axis, you could see that the graph is stepping down its GM over ID. Okay, and clearly when the GM over ID is small, or whenever I'm operating in the stronger inversion, we end up having this value of FT that is higher than compared to the value of FT that I normally get when I operate in the weaker inversion. Okay, now you might wonder, like, is it not possible for us to increase the speed in the weaker inversion? Okay, maybe the reason you may think is that if at all, if I'm trying to, because as I said, the ID is basically proportional to the width. Okay, now this means that if I could able to step up the value of the width, then the current can also be stepped up, and due to which what I can do is that I can increase the current so that I can further increase the value of GM in order to maintain the same ratio. Okay, this is a kind of thought process that may come to you. Okay, but here one thing that you have to observe here is that the current is degrading at an exponential rate. Okay, so this means that I have to increase the width exponentially in order to achieve even a small step in the current value. Okay, what happens is that you have to have a very large width in order to achieve a particular value of current in the weaker inversion, in order to achieve a particular value of GM, in order to get the corresponding speed out of the circuit. Okay, there is also one more thing that happens here is that this CGG, which I have written down, is also proportional to the width. Okay, so this is again depends on the value of the width. So when you try to increase the current just by increasing the width, what happens is that the value of the CGG is also getting increased. People generally will not work in the weaker inversion. So the main idea is that even though we say that I'm getting a very high intrinsic gain in the weaker inversion, on the other hand, we end up having a very small transit frequency. Okay? The speed of the circuit becomes very small, and due to which there may be few applications wherein they use this weaker inversions. Say, for example, in medical devices, like where you want to conserve the energy of your amplifier. Okay, so anything like a surgery that they do across the heart, what they do is that they try to implant some sort of electronics inside the body, right? And we want this electronic inside the body to consume the power to be as small as possible. So this means that I have to spend a current IQ that is small so that you can increase the lifetime of the device that has been implanted inside our body, right? So generally, there are certain applications where the weaker inversion finds its application. Okay, But on the other hand, you cannot expect a speed out of this particular device that has been implanted to our heart just because of the reasoning that I've said here. Okay, so we end up having a very small FT, and speed is also not important for such kind of applications. Okay, so for such kind of cases where the speed is not important, whereas the power is so important, then we can operate our device in the weaker inversion. Okay. In the case of a stronger inversion, we end up having a very large transit frequency, but the efficiency of the transistor becomes slow. This means that you have to spend a lot of power to achieve the maximum speed. Okay. Say, for example, if you are trying to design a processor wherein you are trying to build a kind of amplifier, then you are free to use the stronger inversion. Okay, but there is also one sweet spot which actually lies between the weaker inversion and the stronger inversion, and that region is nothing but our moderate inversion. So in the case of a moderate inversion, we could see that I might not get the frequency or the transit frequency that I normally get in the stronger inversion, but still compromisable value that I can attain in the moderate inversion. And also I cannot attain a high gain that I have got in the weaker inversion, but still the value that I'm getting is also a comparatively a quite good value out of it. Okay, so basically, we always try to fix our transistor to work in the moderate inversion to get the benefit of both these two regions. Okay, and this is becoming quite popular in today's designs. Okay, now what about ID? Okay, so because I have spoken about the current equation that can be applied in the stronger inversion as well as I can apply in the weaker inversion, because in the weaker inversion we know it is exponentially related to our VGS, whereas in the stronger inversion we know it is quadratically related to our VGS. Okay, these are the two things that we know. But what about the current that exists in the moderate inversion? So that we will just see. Basically, there is a requirement that it has to bridge the current equation that I'm getting from both these weaker inversion and the stronger inversion. So I somehow have to bridge it. Okay, so what people did is that the people came up with some sort of compact models. Okay, so people came up with some sort of compact models like EKV. So you can just Google it and search what is this EKV, and there is also advanced compact model, which is the ACM. Okay, so people came up with this kind of compact model in order to create a current expression in the moderate inversion. Okay, so I'm not going to do the derivation of it, but you can use this model. You can just search for this model such that the current equation is defined not only in the moderate inversion, but these models also define the current equation. The same current model can be used in all three different regions. Okay, so even in strong inversion, I can use this current equation, and even in the weaker inversion I can use. Okay, so people came up with some sort of compact model, okay, to define the behavior of the current. But in order to keep this model to be compact, okay, what they did is that they actually kept only few parameters into consideration. Okay, and a few of the parameters like secondary effects are being let out just in order to ensure that the model stays compact. Okay, involving only very few parameters, like our square law, where it involves only very few parameters to define the current. Here again, the compact models were also being designed in such a way they let off few of the considerations, like few of the secondary effects are being let off just to keep the model compact. Okay, so because of which, again, when you try to map these two models with the actual circuitry, there will be some sort of deviation of current. Okay, so again, there is a kind of deviation that we end up. Okay, so let me summarize whatever I've said right now. We want a very simple model. This simple model will help us to analyze the trend. So this means like we want this model to show us some direction in order to achieve a particular spec. Okay, we want this model to be simple, but the simple model like square law and the subthreshold current model actually fails to predict the actual current that flows inside the transistor. Okay, so that people end up creating some sort of compact models like EKV and ACM. Okay, again, these models are being built by adding few more extra parameters. Okay, and these parameters has to be extracted from accurate models. Okay, so we have to do some sort of simulations to extract some values of the parameters, and then we can use the current equation that is derived from the EKV model and use the calculation, like hand calculation, we can do it actually. Okay, so still this model helps us to do hand calculation, and even this model, simple model, is also helps us to do some hand calculations. Okay, So whereas on the other side, when I take the accurate model, where the accurate model currently that is in use is one is this BSIM model, which we are using in the GPTK 180 nanometer technology, and also there is also one more model which is I think PTM. Okay, so this model is again an accurate model which actually involves more than 100 parameters. Okay, so it is not just as one or two. Okay, you are being given with hundreds of parameters, and it becomes very hard to do a hand calculation by making use of this accurate model. Even though it can give the actual behavior of the transistor, we can't use it. As a designer, we do not want this accurate model. What we wanted is a model that helps us to do some sort of hand calculation, and also the model is supposed to be simple enough to show some sort of direction. Okay, but when I go to this particular extreme, okay, as my requirement, what I'm losing is that the model is not giving us the actual behavior. Okay, whereas on the other extreme, I've been forced to involve to use more than hundreds of parameters. Okay, so we need some sort of balance across these two extremes, and that is where the compact models were being used. Okay, but again, as I said, this compact models involves very few parameters. Again, we need few more extra parameters to be added, and then we also have to involve some sort of current equations. Okay, so again, we have to work with the current equations and then try to analyze the circuit. Okay, this becomes quite good for people and the researchers, but for us, even adding few more extra current equation will obviously will move away us from the juice of this particular circuit design. Okay, we want to actually grab the essence of this particular circuit design rather than trying to study different current models and then try to adopt them. Okay, so what we are going to discuss under this GM over ID is that we want to have an accurate model. So what I will do is that I use this accurate model to generate some set of charts, okay, or some set of lookup tables, LUTs, so that there is no need to worry about this hundreds of parameters that are involved. Okay, so I'm trying to step down the difficulties that I'm normally getting out of this accurate model by making use of either the chart or the LUTs. Okay, so that I can also don't want to rely on the complex relations. Okay, and but still I can use some sort of simple design process that has been followed in the simple square law model. Okay, so I'm trying to bridge both these extremes, okay, by making use of those charts and LUTs. Clear? So these charts and LUTs are basically derived from the accurate model, and I'm going to use the simple square law model or the sub-threshold model, which actually defines the gain or whatever uh, the the transit frequency of the system or any other parameters in order to know the direction at which I have to move on. Okay, so I can combine both these extremes to actually do the designs. Okay, so till now, whatever we have done is that we spoke about the importance of this GM over ID, and then we also have analyzed that there exist three different regions of inversion. Okay, and the corresponding value of GM over ID that I have to have to operate my transistor in a particular inversion region. And later, we spoke about model that we can use as a designer without putting ourselves into learning some new expressions to reflect the current in all three different regions of operation. Okay, so this is what we have seen till now. Now we will talk about the design process. Okay, so a MOSFET operation can be defined with a function of 5 variables. Okay, there exist 5 variables for the designer to drive the MOSFET into different regions of inversions, okay, in order to meet your given specification. So among those 5 variables, the 3 are voltage variables and 2 are the dimension variables. Okay, so what we do next is that we'll just try to understand how these variables are going to impact the MOSFET behavior that I've used here. Okay, so that the designer can use these variables as a kind of degree of freedom to meet the spec. Okay, so first let's look at the variable VSB. Okay, and let us see how does this variable VSB is going to impact the MOSFET behavior, and see whether I can use this VSB variable as the degree of freedom. So in short, I'll just call this as DOF, okay, degree of freedom, by the designer to meet the given spec. Okay, so let us see whether I can use this as a degree of freedom, so that if I know that this I can use it as a degree of freedom, then the designer can use this VSB to put your transistor in such a way that it meets a particular spec. Okay, yeah, so first let us look at it. Okay, so here is a graph that shows the variation of the threshold voltage with respect to the VSB. Okay, and also I could see that there is a circuit that I've plotted here, which is a simple differential amplifier, and clearly we could see that there is a potential difference between the body of our M1 M2 transistor and the source terminal, because the source terminal of our M1 and M2 are attached to a different potential than compared to the body of M1 and M2 transistors. Okay, so generally this kind of structure is what we see in our normal life, okay, where, as a designer. So clearly the source potential of the input MOS transistors are not controlled by the designer. It is defined by some sort of circuit topology. Okay, so there is nothing that I can force some value over here. It's basically built because of the circuit topology. Okay, and I cannot go and control the voltage. I can have it here. Okay, so that is what I mean here. So in general, we know that the VSB has a variation on the value of the threshold voltage. But if you ask me whether I can use this as a controlling device for a designer, the answer is no, because the value at this particular node cannot be defined by you. You cannot force some voltage across this VP. Okay, so because of which I cannot use this VSB as a designer's degrees of freedom. Okay, so we will drop this VSB out of our equations. Okay, so now let us look for the next variable, which is the VDS. Okay, now we know that this VDS effect is generally modeled with a parameter which is known as R naught. Okay, and we know that this R naught is generally defined as a ratio between the early voltage divided by the current that flows through the circuit. Okay, so now what we have done here is that I've just tried to plot the value of this VA. Okay, so I think in the previous slide I've told that the value of this VA, you can assume it to be a constant. But when I look over here, you could see that I have plotted the value of VA with respect to VDS. It is not VGS, it is with respect to VDS. Okay, so clearly you could see that the value of VA varies with respect to the value of VDS. And this variation becomes more serious when you work with a longer channel. Okay, now as I said, if at all, if you want to have a larger gain, okay, we know one thing is that you either have to increase the value of GM. The other variable that I have in control is to increase the value of this R out. Okay, but in order to have this R out to be large, okay, we want this VA to be large. Okay, now to have this VA to be large, I have to have a larger value of channel length. That is point number one. Okay, so the point number one is that to have a large value of VA, the point number one is that I have to have larger channel length. The point number two is that the value of VDS that I have to have also supposed to be large. Okay, so clearly in this case, you could see that I have to have a very large value of VDS, drain to source potential, to achieve this large value of VA. Okay, in case if you are having a very small value of VDS, then it doesn't matter whether you are going for a shorter channel length or a longer channel length, it doesn't matter at all. Okay, whereas if you really want to increase the value of the output impedance, then there are two things that you need to satisfy to have a larger value of VA. Okay, but having a larger value of VDS is not always quite possible. Okay, particularly when you go for low power designs. The voltage that you would have, the value of VDD that you would be assigned is already small. Okay, say for example like 1.8 volt or something like that. Okay, you end up having a very small supply voltage. Okay, and let me draw a simple CS amplifier. Okay, and I apply my input towards the NMOS M1, and we know we have a V out. Okay, so to have a large VA out of the transistor, as I said, we have to have a larger potential across the drain and source. Okay, and again a larger value of VDS across the drain and source of our M2, so that both the transistors are giving us a larger VA out of the device. Okay, but in turn, what is happening is that we are trying to restrict the amount of swing that I normally get out of the circuit, and this becomes more serious when you operate with a smaller supply voltage like 0.9 voltage or 0.8 voltage. Okay, and if you dedicate a large voltage across this VDS, then you end up having a very small swing around this output node. Okay, so that is something that you need to consider. So again, what I could see is that using a value of VDS is not quite controlling the way in which I want to operate my circuit. Okay, so what I'm trying to mean is that in general, the usage of the VDS is defined by what type of application that you're using. Okay, I cannot use it for all the type of application. So the VDS again falls from using as a degree of freedom. Okay, So I cannot use this VDS because of this reasoning. Okay. So now let us look at the last variable, which is the VGS under the voltage variable. Okay. So let us see whether this VGS at least can be used as a degree of freedom for a designer to work in. Okay. Now, as I said before, we know that the MOSFET is a voltage controlled current source. Okay. So this means the controlling voltage is nothing but our VGS. Okay. So this means that there is a direct connection between the voltage that I have and the output current that flows. Okay. So since because of this tight coupling, one can actually use this VGS as a degree of freedom. Okay. But one thing that you have to remember is that normally in an analog circuit design, okay, we generally bias the transistors with a bias current rather than using a bias voltage like VGS. And the reason is that when you apply a voltage through a very thin wire, the voltage at one end, if you are trying to apply as 1.8 volt, when you send through a long wire, which is very thin inside a chip, okay, you end up dropping this voltage consecutively, and due to which what happens is that you end up having a voltage like 1.6 or something. Okay, so there will be a degradation in the voltage. So due to which the people were not using this voltage to transfer from one end to the other end, but rather what they were using is this bias current. Okay, so generally you will see some sort of current mirroring circuit inside the amplifier design, and this current mirroring circuit helps us to bias the transistor through this bias current. Okay, so instead of using this VGS as a variable, for me what I can do is I can use this ID. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to replace this VGS variable with ID variable. Okay, now you might wonder like how it is possible, can I use it like that? If you see, you could see that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the value of VGS and ID. Okay, say for example, I want a particular value of VGS, then there exists only one current that flows. Okay, so because of this one-to-one correspondence between the current and the value of VGS, I can replace this VGS with ID. Okay, a real degree of freedom rather than using our VGS. Okay, so now let us look at the two remaining dimension parameters and see how they impact the MOSFET behavior, so that we can derive its usability as a degree of freedom by the designer. Okay, yeah. So here I have just listed out some of the shortcomings which we have already seen. Okay, so we know that whenever we involve with shorter channel length, okay, we end up having a very high speed circuit. Okay, so the EFT becomes quite large when I go for a shorter channel length. Okay, and again the area of the transistor also becomes small. So when the area of the channel becomes small, we know that the capacitance, which is generally proportional to the width and the length, okay, will also becomes small just because of usage of the shorter channel length. Okay, so when this guy is becoming small, then obviously the gate capacitance will also get smaller. Okay, on the other side, when I use a longer channel length, we know that we end up having a very large value of VA. Okay, so apart from this having a large value of VA, we also end up having the reduction in the random mismatches. Okay, so there are a few mismatches that normally being considered during the design of amplifiers. Okay, so one is called as the VT mismatch. Okay, you can just Google it, but I will just talk about these mismatches when we design the circuits. And the other one is the current mismatches. Okay. Okay, so these are the two different mismatches, and both these mismatches actually being stepped down by increasing the channel length. Okay, so whenever you deal with some sort of differential amplifiers or current mirroring circuit, then you need to have a larger channel length transistors in order to reduce the mismatch between the two transistors. Okay, so if I take a differential amplifier, okay, we want to match the GM of both these transistors as close as possible. So this means that both these input transistors supposed to be operated with a larger channel length so that the mismatch between these two differential amplifiers can be reduced. Okay, else you end up having some sort of mismatch between the GMs of the circuit, and due to which there are other effects that you will have, like offset voltage. You end up having a large offset voltage at the input. Okay, depending on situation, I have to pick a particular choice for the channel length. Okay, and also if you look carefully, the flicker noise will also be stepped down whenever we deal with a larger channel length. Okay, so clearly I can use this as my choice. Okay, whether I just want to use it as a high-speed circuit, or should I need to have a very large gain, depending on which I can choose a particular value of channel length. Okay, so this means that I can use this channel length as a kind of variable directly. Okay, there is nothing to depend or nothing is being forced on this. Okay, the choice is completely depends on the designer. Okay, depending on his spec, he can either choose a shorter channel length or a longer channel length. Clear? Yeah. Next comes the most complex variable, which is the width one, which is the last variable. Okay. So generally, the choice of the width is impacted by the following variables, like the transistor efficiency and the choice of the channel length. Okay, and even the current. Okay, so anything that I do for this width, okay, in turn varies these quantities. Okay, so what I could say is that there is a direct dependency on these variables. Say for example, for some reason you are about to change the width of the device. So what happens is that you end up varying each of these quantities in turn. Okay, this is one of the issue, is that it has dependency on these variables. Okay, the second issue that it has is that the search range. Okay, so say for example, I want to choose a width for my transistor from a particular technology. This width actually varies over a wider range. You could see that it varies from sub micrometer, 1 micrometer, to all the way to 1,000 micrometer. So you could see that the search range for the width is also quite wider. Okay, so you end up having a larger search range. Okay, so for example, let us assume that we have picked a value for the width. Okay, from this larger search range. Okay, so now for some reason you are about to change the length of your channel. Okay, now when you try to change the length of the channel, what happens is that it in turn changes the transistor efficiency, and this in turn changes the current, and this in turn forces you to find the value of the width that satisfies your thing. So again, what you do is that you try to identify the appropriate width from this large search space. Okay, so the major problem is that the width has two major issue, is that its dependency and the large search range. I do not want to spend a lot of time in searching a particular value of width in doing this search across a larger range, wider range of this width. Okay, so because of which the people were forced to look for an alternate variable such that they have to satisfy two things. Okay, one is that variable that I'm trying to replace in the place of width supposed to have a smaller search range. That is point number one. This is one of the requirement, and the second requirement is that orthogonal control. Okay, the variable that I want to substitute in the place of width supposed to be an orthogonal control variable. Now, what do I mean by this orthogonal control variable? So this means that any variable that I'm going to use, if I vary, it should not disturb these choices. Okay, so I want this variable, which I supposed to substitute in the place of width, supposed to be orthogonal to these dependencies. Okay, I do not want to depend on this set of variables, so that I can choose my variable independent of these quantities. Okay, so we need an alternate variable for the width. Okay, because of reasoning of these two things. Okay, so one such variable that was used previously when they were using the square law model is this VOE. Okay, the fix for this width was VOE. Okay, so the VOE can actually ranges from 0.1 volt to a maximum of 0.5 or whatever the range. Okay, so here in this case, what I'm trying to mean is that the value of this VOE basically falls within a small range. Okay, so point number one is satisfied when I try to fix that. The point number two is that I want this variable VOE to be orthogonal to other variables. Again, this VOE addresses this issue. Okay, so again, the VOE can be chosen, okay, independent of the other variables. Okay, once I get the value of VOE, once I fix the value of VOE, then I have to reconvert this variable back to our width, because what we actually wanted is the width of our device, right? So we want some sort of process in which from this alternate variable, I want to get back the width that I want to use for it. So what people did is that they made use of this square law current model. Okay, and just by substituting the value of VOE and the choice of ID that is defined from the spec, okay, they can actually get the value of the width from here. Okay, so this is the inverse method by which from this alternate variable I could extract the value of this width. Okay, now I'll talk about the issue of using this VOE. Okay, the issue is that the current equation that I've written down is no more valid. Okay, even in the stronger inversion, this square law model is not going to work. Okay, even if you use a longer channel, when the value of VDS becomes large, then you will end up having the drain induced barrier lowering effect. Okay, so because of which the square law model actually fails. And you cannot use it for moderate or the weak inversion based on this particular formulation. Okay, so because of these reasons, we were being forced to find a new fix for this variable W, and that new fix is nothing but our GM over ID. Okay, so now let us see whether this GM over ID satisfies the requirement of these two things. Okay, so clearly we could see that the GM over ID has a range from 1 all the way a maximum of 30. Okay, so you have again a finer search range for this particular GM over ID term. Okay, and also if you see that the value of this GM over ID is also going to be orthogonal. Okay, so I have to prove this, the orthogonality of this one. Okay, the GM over ID in turn actually controls the transistor efficiency, and also it is orthogonal. Now, how do I say that it is orthogonal? Is that we know that the GM as well as ID both were proportional to the widths. Okay, now when I take the ratio, what happens is that the ratio between this GM over ID, it actually cancels out the width of the transistor. Okay, so any change in the other variables like the length or the VGS, okay, is not going to affect this particular ratio in turn, because we are again taking its ratio, even though it depends on the length or the VGS. When we take as a ratio, it actually generally cancels out their impacts altogether. Okay, so now let us see how one can use this GM over ID variable for the design. Okay, so based on what we have learned, if I use this GM over ID as a small, okay, we know that we will be operated in the stronger inversion. Okay, and when I use this GM over ID as a large value, then we know that we will be operated in the weaker inversion. And if it is not too large, then we will be obviously in the moderate inversion. Okay, and we also know that whenever we deal with small GM over ID, we end up having a very small GM. Okay, and because of which the gain of the system becomes small, and the power dissipation will be large because we have to have a very large current ID, correct? So that the ratio becomes small here. Okay, so and again when we see here, the area of the transistor will also becomes quite small, and the capacitance will also become small, and due to which both these effect in turn helps us to increase the transistor transit frequency. Okay, the FT of the transistor becomes higher. Okay, so generally it leads to a very high speed circuit. Okay, and to have a large value of VA, because as I said that the gain becomes small just because the GM is small here. Okay, so the only variable that I have in control to improve the gain is to increase the value of this R0, and we know that the value of this R0 is basically depends on the value of VA divided by ID. Now in order to have this larger VA, there are two things I said we have to satisfy. One of the thing is that we have to use longer channel length. Okay, channel length, and the second thing that I have to look for it is the large VDS. Okay, so across the drain and the source, I have to apply a larger VDS. Okay, so these are the two things I have to consider while I'm trying to design with a small GM over ID. Whereas when I go for a larger GM over ID, already the GM would be large. Okay, so we end up having a very large GM, and also the transistor efficiency is high just because the GM over ID is high in this particular zone. And we also know that we end up having a very large channel length and the width. Okay, so due to which the random mismatches across the transistors will be small, and due to which we end up having a very low noise, but the frequency, okay, the transit frequency becomes small. Okay, okay, so that is what we would end up having over here. Okay, so I particularly want to point out an important statement that has been listed out here. Okay, basically, since we have a tradition of using this VOE, okay, so previously we were using the square law model when we are dealing with technologies. that are greater than 1 micrometer. Okay, so we were using this square law model. As I said before, whenever the square law model was used, we were using a VOV as a fix to our width. Okay, so generally people have a tradition of thinking VOV as a kind of variable. Okay, and they have developed a greater intuition in using this VOV as a kind of variable. So it makes sense for us, even though we have changed our VOV to a GM over ID, we still want to cater the people who have designing from the beginning, right? So it makes sense sometimes to find a way to convert this GM over ID to look something like a VOV. Okay, I cannot convert this directly. The reason is that we have seen that in the shorter channel, when I'm dealing with shorter channel length, we know that because of this drain induced barrier lowering, DIBL, the threshold voltage of the transistor varies with respect to the VDS. Basically, what I'm trying to mean is that the threshold voltage is no more constant, okay, when I go with a shorter channel length, and due to which the VOV cannot be defined. So rather than defining a kind of conversion between this GM over ID to VOV, I want to define a replacement variable for this VOV, and that replacement variable I'm going to call it as V star. Okay, so V star and VOV can be considered as same. Okay, but still it is not equal to VOV, because in general VOV is defined as VGS minus VT, and in this expression the VT is no more constant. Okay, so in order to counteract this issue, people tend to replace this VOV with a different name which is labeled as V star. Okay, so again we can relate this V star as a replacement variable for the VOE. Okay, I told about the reasoning why we want VOE to be considered again. Okay, the reason is that the people from the beginning they started a kind of intuition in using this VOE as a kind of variable for them. Okay, so due to which we want to find a mechanism for us to convert this GM over ID value in terms of a VOV. Okay, so what I do next is that I make use of this equation where we know that the GM is defined as something like 2ID by VOV. Okay, this is basically from the square law model. Okay, so from the square law model, I know that the GM can be defined which looks something like this. Now from here, I could derive the VOV as something like 2ID by GM. Okay, now as I said, since the value of this VOV is not to be considered as a kind of fix for the current technologies, for the nanometer technology, we replace this with V star. Okay, so V star is written as. So now clearly it's a relation that tells me if you started working with VOV intuition, then based on the choice of our GM over ID, one can actually convert your choice of value of GM over ID to what is known as a V star. Okay, obviously we have to convert the new fix of GM over ID back to our width. Okay, so how do we convert this GM over ID variable in terms of width? Okay, so that is what we are going to see here. Now, one thing that is clear is that the graph towards the right side shows that for different widths, you could see that the current is also equally getting shifted. Okay, so this means that the ID is basically proportional to the width that I'm working in. Okay, so if I increase the width by a certain amount, the current is also getting equally incremented. Okay, so that is what you could see from these pictures that I have listed here. But this is not true when you are working with a narrow width. Okay, so if the width is already wide enough, then we can always assume that the current is directly proportional to the width. Okay, so because of which the ratio, which is GM over ID, okay, we know that both this GM and ID are dependent on the value of width, right? So when I try to have this ratio, the ratio becomes independent width. Okay, so one can use this fact of independency of width on this ratio to our advantage. Okay, so what I can do is that I can choose a reference width. Okay, and I can plot different set of graphs like GM over ID versus VGS. Okay, and then based on which we can do some calculations. Okay, so clearly we could see that there is a direct one-to-one correspondence between the value of VGS and the ID, which we have already seen, right? So we replace this VGS with ID in one of the variable discussion. Okay, and also we could see that there is also a direct one-to-one relation between the value of VGS and this GM over ID. Okay, clearly there is a one-to-one correspondence between the ID and VGS, and there is a one-to-one correspondence between the GM over ID and the VGS. So there is a common variable that is fit for both these graphs. Okay, so what I can do is that instead of plotting against a common variable, I can plot something like GM over ID versus the ID. Okay, removing the common variable. Now you could clearly see there exists a one-to-one correspondence with the choice of GM over ID that I have chosen and the corresponding current that I have getting for a reference width. Okay, this is for a reference width. I have to choose a width. Okay, and that width normally we will take it as 10 micrometer, and we can get all of these graphs. Okay, now having this one-to-one relation between this GM over ID and this ID, how will I extract the width? That is the next question that you may have, right? So let me just tell. So we know that this ID is always proportional to the width, provided your transistor doesn't have a narrow width. Okay, then what I can do is that I can use this cross multiplication term to calculate the width that is required for the current that is defined by the design problem. Okay, so what we have done before is that I have plotted the graph of ID versus GM over ID for a reference width W. Okay, this is the first quantity. And just because ID and W are proportional, I have this. Okay. Now, from the specification, you would end up having different current. Okay. And we know that this different current is also proportional to the width value, right? And that width value, I'm writing it as WX. Since because both are proportional to each other, when we try to take a ratio, we end up having this as our cross multiplication. Okay. So this in turn will help us to find the W value of the design problem. Okay. I hope that you're clear. So in the place of W, I know I've used my 10 micrometer as my reference width, and I only have to know what current I have chosen for the GM over ID that I've selected. Okay, so that I can just choose from this graph. So that current I will substitute over here. Say for example, it is equal to something like 0.1 milliampere or something. Okay, and maybe from the spec you would have got some current value which maybe around 10 milliampere. Okay, so just by making use of the simple relation like cross multiplication, I end up evaluating what's supposed to be the corresponding width that is required for the design. Okay, so that is how I convert my GM over ID variable back to our width variable. Okay, so now that we have seen how these 5 design variables impact our circuit design, and it's a quick summary of all these design variables. Okay, yeah, so we had all those 5 variables, and each of these variables either we have retained it or we would have replaced with a different variable. So that is what is being summarized here. Okay, so we had a width, and that width was being replaced with a VOV when it comes to the square law model. Okay, or in the newer technology we replace this width with GM over ID. Okay, and this GM over ID make use of the chart or the LUTs to get back our width, whereas this VOV uses the current equation to revert back to the width parameter. Okay, generally the length is derived directly from the spec. Okay, so we make use of the charts based on the value of VA that is required. We can actually get down this length. Okay, the next thing is the VGS. As I said, the value of VGS is not directly used as a kind of variable by the designer, but rather they use a current. Just because there is a one-to-one correspondence between the VGS and ID, we can replace this VGS with a current. Okay, generally because of the reason that all analog circuit designs are built using current biasing circuitry. The next comes the VDS. VDS is not a kind of variable that one can use, but still, based on the VOE requirement, we can still have a kind of margin calculations. Okay, so that is what is being given here. And lastly, the VSB is generally forced by the topology that is used. We try to neglect this impact during the older technologies, but we can actually calculate this VSB impact, how much of the threshold voltage gets modified by making use of the charts and the LUTs. Okay, so now the question is, what are the different type of charts and LUTs one has to generate to translate the spec data to values of these design variables? But to generate these different set of graphs, we first have to understand the important properties that some of the small signal parameters possess. Okay, so what we do next is to see what different small signal parameters we have and how do they actually work. the small signal parameters like GM, it could be CGS or CDS, okay, and even the thermal noises that I have, okay, flicker noises. So all of these parameters generally proportional to the width, okay. So this is one important property that we have, okay. And because of this proportionality of the width, whatever we did for the current, okay, we can make use of the same principle, okay. What I can do is I can generate the GM or what all these small signal models, okay. So GM or CGS or whatever it is, I can generate each of these graphs with a reference width, and that reference width could be 10 micrometer, okay. And because of this dependency, what I can do next is to use my cross multiplication. Sorry, here I supposed to have, okay. So I can use this cross multiplication phenomena to calculate the width or to calculate the actual GM of the circuit from the design specification, okay. So that is the added advantage that I have when I have all these small signal parameters when they are proportional to the width values, okay. And also you could see that there are a few parameters that are independent of the width as well, okay. So if you look carefully, the FT, if you see, basically the GM is proportional to the width, and even the value of CGG is also proportional to the width, and when we take the ratio, they become width independent, okay. So which means that I can derive these quantities for any width that I wanted, okay. So with a single width only, I can just derive all of these quantities, okay. So it is not only this FT, we also have something like GM divided by the width, okay, and GM R naught, because again both would depend on the value of this width, and again VA itself will become a width independent quantity if I take it as a kind of ratios, okay. So these are some of the added advantage of having small signal parameters which are directly proportional to the width, okay, so that I can use any width that I wanted, calculate everything, and then based on our circuit specification, I can revert back in calculating these variables, okay. Yeah. So obviously we have to generate these graphs, okay. How do we generate these graphs? So normally the charts, when we try to generate, we only sweep one of the variable, which is VGS, and while the other variables like VDS and VSB will be fixed to a single value, okay. That is how I can have a two-dimensional charts, okay. And we use the other variable length as a secondary variable, okay. So again, I just try to vary only these two length as well as the width, sorry, the VGS of my transistors, while the other variables were being kept at a fixed value, okay. And that in turn would then generate a kind of graph which looks something like this, okay. I have to perform some sort of DC analysis to get these graphs, clear? But the output of this set of graph, just because we fixed the value of VDS and VSB, will not be accurate enough, okay. If you still want a more accurate reflection of your transistor behavior during the calculation, then we have to rely on LUTs. So in the case of LUT, what we do is that we not only sweep the variables of VGS and the length, but we also sweep the VDS and VSB, okay. So we will have some other dimensions to our charts, okay. So based on this LUTs, we end up having a four-dimensional LUT, so that we can evaluate the actual value of VSB or the actual value of VDS that I wanted to have to exactly convert our spec to these values, okay. So with this, I will stop here, and in the next session, we will try to use this LUTs to do a very simple circuit design, which is a CS amplifier, and later we will go for the complicated designs like differential amplifiers and op amps, okay. So with this, I will stop here, and thanks for attending.